Of the St. Helena Unified School District. Today is Thursday, February 25th. I'm Maria Haug, Board President. I would like to introduce my fellow trustees. Board Vice President, Mrs. Lisa Pelosi. Clerk to the Board, Mr. Julio Olguin. Trustee, Mrs. Jeannie Kerr. Trustee, Mr. Forrest Minter. And our student representative to the Board, Mr. Joe Brody. I would also like to introduce our district staff. Superintendent, Dr. Mary Lou Wilson. Chief Business Official, Mrs. Andy Stubbs. Chief Academic and Human Resource Officer, Mr. Christopher Heller. Executive Assistant to the Superintendent and the Governing Board, Ms. Erica Madrigal. And our IT Systems Analyst, Mr. Derek Machado. Providing translation this afternoon is Julie Young and Paul Huertas. I would like to allow our translators an opportunity to explain how to use the interpreting feature on Zoom at this time.
Muy buenas tardes. Existe la opción de escuchar esta presentación en el idioma español. Lo que tienen que hacer es dirigirse a la parte baja de su pantalla y buscar el símbolo del globo terráqueo. Le van a hacer un clic allí y van a escoger la opción en español, que está con la palabra en inglés, Spanish, y así podrán escuchar en español toda la presentación. Gracias.
And we'd like to thank our interpreters for all their hard work this afternoon. We're delighted that you are viewing on television channel 27, Zoom, or our YouTube channel. A copy of this board meeting video will also be available on our website at www.sthelinaunified.org. I would like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda for this meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve this afternoon's meeting.
Joe, would you like to cast a preferential vote?
Aye.
Is there a second motion?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So today we are having a board study session, and I would like to call on Dr. Mary Lou Wilson for our study session on enrollment options and budget development.
Thank you and good evening, board members and members of the community. A study session is an opportunity for staff to take a deeper dive into content for our board members and focus on a couple of topics as opposed to a full board meeting. So tonight, Andy Stubbs will be providing you with a great deal of information around enrollment options and also the budget. President Haug, I'd recommend that Ms. Stubbs has created a part 1 and a part 2, and so we would ask for public comment on part 1 and then move into part 2.
Yes, and I do believe that will it be probably appropriate to take a break in about an hour and 15 minutes? Will that be a midway point, or so we will be taking a break?
So the meeting is scheduled for 2 hours?
Yes.
And so, yes.
Yes.
When you feel comfortable, just let Andy know.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Stubbs?
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share the presentation on my screen. Okay. And so as Dr. Wilson said, today we will be discussing enrollment with a special focus on district of choice and budget development with a focus on addressing any deficits that may arise due to the impact of the wildfires and pandemic on property tax revenue. How's that? Okay. And so the district has been participating in the District of Choice, or DOC program, for about 10 years. And the DOC program admits students from other districts through an application and an unbiased selection process. And here we see the annual District of Choice timeline and also our current enrollment numbers. And this year we have 24 students enrolled for the District of Choice program. And it's important to note that we only receive revenue from 55 of those 124 students. The other 69 students come from basic aid districts, and so we don't receive District of Choice revenue for those students. And in December, the board voted to reduce the enrollment caps for 2021-22 for the reasons shown, most notably to keep smaller class sizes as we focus on academic recovery from the pandemic. And then currently, the District of Choice program ends after the 2022-23 school year. Last month, Dr. Wilson provided an update on projected enrollment for next year based on our current grade level cohorts. And as you can see, TK and Kinder will be enrolling, the enrollment for those residents opened on February 22nd, so we don't have information on those grade levels yet, but we do have room in grades 1 and 9 for next year for DOC students at this point. So what do we know about the future of the District of Choice program? The 2017 reauthorization of the program required that the LAO's office conduct a study and make recommendations regarding possible future extensions of the program. And their report included 6 key findings, and I think the most important of which are that participation by low-income and Latino students has increased. And that the program provides students with more educational opportunities overall. And as a result of these findings, the LAO makes several recommendations. First, to reauthorize the program. Second, to repeal the cap that limits the number of students who can transfer out of each district over the life of the program. Third, to allow a later application deadline, that being March 1st. And then fourth, increasing the funding for basic aid districts. And most notably, that would be for students who are English learners and low-income students. And then I did check with the California Department of Education and our own financial advisors, School Services of California, to learn more about the legislature's next steps. And while CDE did not have any new information for us, our school services contact provided a brief report in email that I'd like to share with you now. She states that in terms of timing, an extension of the program should be done before the end of this legislative session, October 2022. And she reminds us that the District of Choice Education Code becomes inoperative on July 1st, 2023, so it would be a good idea to have it extended by the legislature if they're going to do that by January 2023, so that that spring before it becomes inoperative. And then she goes on to state that the key is to find a legislature who represents one of the participating districts, hopefully a basic aid district, in order to prioritize increasing the funding rate as recommended by the LAO. And that legislator would potentially support the program and author or sponsor the bill. And so there may be other school districts for whom continuing the District of Choice program is a more pressing issue, and they'd be more inclined to reach out to a legislator representative and have them possibly author or sponsor a bill. So we're waiting to hear more about the future of the District of Choice program. And then if we take a closer look at our own resident enrollment projections as presented in a demographic study by Jack Schrader and Associates, we see a downward trend, which is common in a lot of school districts across the state of California right now as families are moving out to states where the cost of living is lower. And so this table was constructed back in December 9th, 2019. And what it does is, beginning in 2021, just on the table, for the purposes of an enrollment analysis, it removes the new district of choice students from coming in. And so as you can see, our numbers are on the decline if we're just looking at district of choice students that are currently in the district and then resident students. So in light of all this information, what are the board's options regarding the District of Choice program? In addition to notifying both the California Department of Education and our own County Office of Education, the board would have to elect to no longer accept a transfer of pupils under DOC if it no longer wished to participate in the program. And so the board would have to take action by September 16th, 2021. Most notably, if the board decides to continue in the DOC program, applicants for 2022-23 will be released to the public immediately following board action. If the board decided to withdraw from the DOC program, the board would have to pass a resolution in conjunction with board action to withdraw. And then after board action, staff would complete the registration or withdrawal survey through the California Department of Education. And so there are some additional points to consider as the board discusses the future of District of Choice participation. I think it's very important to note that students enrolled in the district at the time of the change will be permitted to complete their school career in the district as a District of Choice student. Also, as a reminder, the district would lose approximately $115,000 in revenue if the board decided to withdraw. However, we would also see a decrease in expenses due to the ability to reduce staffing for less enrollment and so forth. And as we saw in one of the previous slides, we spend almost $30,000 per pupil in St. Helena Unified, yet we only receive about $2,000 per student through the District of Choice program, and so that would be per non-basic aid school students. And then finally, it's important to remember, too, that our current district residency rules are very restrictive and would not allow for very many students to transfer in without that District of Choice program. And so that concludes the enrollment portion of my presentation. We have some time now for questions and then board discussion regarding whether or not the board wishes to continue in the DOC program for 21-22. And what might be the timeline for board action.
So I would like to open this meeting for public comment. Is there any public comment submitted, or is there anyone who wishes to make public comment at this time? And Ms. Madrigal will explain how you can access public comment if you need to.
President Haug, there was no public comment written and submitted through our public comment at stheleniaunified.org. However, there are members of the public participating. So if any members of the public care to provide public comment at this time, please hover towards the bottom of your screen and raise your virtual hand. I have one member of the public who would like to comment.
Please go ahead and please state your name and your address, and your comments are limited to 3 minutes. Thank you for commenting and attending our meeting.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. This is Brandon Farrell. I don't know if I'm supposed to be doing public comment or if I'm part of the discussion. So
So, Brandon, you're welcome to provide public comment now at this time.
Okay. So Okay. I thought I was going to be able to ask questions in the discussion, so I have to rethink my piece. So sorry, I'm going to start over. Brandon, Brandon Farrell, I am I'm going to act as the SHTA president in this public comment. And instead of asking questions, I'm going to use my public comment to give what my membership actually feels about this particular policy over the last 10 years. We actually think that this has been a failed policy for our district. We want to preserve certain enrollment numbers because obviously we want to have the right type of enrollment numbers to provide the classes and the diversity of classes that we need to offer to our students. So it's important, for instance, when we went to this program that we talked about, a high school of 500 students was around the ballpark of what we wanted to be able to offer in a capacity for offering classes. But I have received a lot of comments from my members over the years about this policy, and we honestly think that this is a failed policy on many fronts. Number one, it has failed to provide the influx of money that was originally put in for on this policy. It has dwindled as the presentation alluded to. We believe it's had unintended consequences. Some of the, what I would call, you disguised as expenses, has caused some unintended consequences for work around administrative actions and teacher actions and things of that nature. I didn't really phrase that correctly because, again, I thought I was going to be able to ask questions about this. But we also know that an intra-district transfer policy that we used before, if allowed to create a fair process for admission under an inter-district transfer, would provide much more stability for the families that wanted to take advantage of the opportunities in this district, and that's what this is kind of about. And mainly, there has been also some legal issues that we've had to deal with in this policy that have caused us to change throughout the years, whether it be a sibling, little tweak here and there and things like that. So really, our members are very keen on this policy because it does affect the number of teachers that we have. But to be honest with you, we do not prefer this district of choice policy whatsoever.
Thank you, Brandon. And will you remain with the with our discussion today in case the board wishes to call on you throughout our deliberation?
Yes, I would be happy to, and I'll probably have a better chance of phrasing what I wanted to say within a question than that little public comment right there.
Okay. Thank you, Brandon. Or Mr. Farrell. Are there any other public comments?
There's no additional public comment.
Okay. Thank you. So, trustees, our time for deliberation and discussion has begun. We are not voting on anything specifically this meeting. We're just discussing and clarifying all the very intricate aspects of how we go forward with the DOC program. As we know, it has always been a program where we have had to make specific resolutions in certain cases because we've had to work around individual issues and that sort of thing. So it has been a time-consuming program, as Brandon said, for our administration as well. So would anyone like to go first?
Can I just, I have a clarifying question. based on Mr. Farrell's statement. First, he was saying the staff feels that DOC is a failed policy, but then he said something about they were keen on the policy. So were they keen on the inter-district transfer agreement policy or the DOC? I'm a little bit confused by that last statement.
Could you clarify that for us, Brandon?
Yeah, thank you, Trustee Pelosi. We prefer an inter-district transfer, like most basic aid districts provide inter-district transfer or intra-district agreement, more so than a district of choice. I've not found other basic aid districts that offer a district of choice. Everyone else that I've found, and I could be easily wrong, has a intra-district agreement. And that's what we as a staff prefer because of some of the consequences and some of the realization that this is a district of where people want to be. And when we take in students that are not in our boundary, we want those students to appreciate as much as they can. And many do, but there are some that have taken advantage of our educational system, in our opinion. And that's been a very difficult pill to swallow. So we prefer the intra-district agreement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farrell.
I'd like to change the format a little bit first. I would like us to first ask the administration any clarifying questions that we have, and the clarifying questions can be all covered first, and then we can have further discussion. So maybe if we could start with clarifying questions for the administration, and then continue, once we have all those questions answered, we can continue with discussion.
I actually have a question, and this has been the question of our board for the last 10 years or so since District of Choice is, so what is optimal enrollment? What is optimal enrollment in our district? What do we want to have? How many students? If Mr. Farrell's saying the high school, they want 500, then that means, 500 then for the rest of our schools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would want to involve Dr. Wilson in this part of the discussion if I could.
It's an ongoing challenging question, correct? And what is optimal enrollment? I believe when you first put DOC into play, you were looking at the enrollment being a little bit higher than what we had it, what we've been recently. Currently, we've been hovering around somewhere between 1,200 and 1,250, with as low as in the 1,100s. The classes as a whole at all of our schools have been pre-COVID, relatively small in class size, with an average of around 15 to 18, and our primary elementary was really closer to 20 to 1. Talking about class size during COVID is challenging because you know that we purposely set about to lower the class size even more so that we could be in person as quickly as possible. So right now our numbers are smaller than they have been in years past. And we have some students that are in full distance, and we have some families that have chosen to go into homeschool, and we have some families who have moved to other districts. So as far as what is the optimal size, I think we have to go to what do you want your class sizes to continue to be in the future at the primary, elementary, and at the middle school and the high school. Remember that regardless of the number of students that we have as a basic aid district, your funding doesn't change. So with fewer students, you'll still have the same funding. So you could continue to offer similar programs that you are currently offering. It may be that the classes are smaller, though. And I'm speaking primarily at the middle school and the high school. We have a very robust elective program at our high school. There are At one point, I don't know the number now, but at one point there were 40 some odd singletons. So those are single classes that are being taught. And our students enjoy the options and the variety that they have afforded to them. And I think that's much of what Mr. Farrell was alluding to. So I don't have a magic number, Trustee Kerr, as to what exactly is the right class size. This year during COVID, as I've been visiting the primary and the elementary classes, they're hovering someplace under 15. And there's some old research around class size from the years when class size reduction came into play, which was the 20-to-1 for primary schools, that ultimately indicated that if you can't get below 15-to-1, 20, 25, or 30, or 40 really doesn't make a difference. What I've been seeing in the classrooms right now is a real opportunity for our teachers to individualize for our students at the primary and the elementary schools because the class size is quite low. And they're also challenged because of COVID-19 and the inability to, be physically close to the students and have small group interaction the way they typically would. To answer your question, I don't know what the perfect class size is. I think it's more about, as a board and a community, what's most important to you with regards to the number of contacts in every classroom.
I'd like to ask one aspect that has been a subject when we're looking at school size is, and it's not an academic question, it is after school athletics question.
Mm-hmm.
And can you remind us what is the cutoff for the staying in the league that we are currently in? And maybe Mr. Farrell, you can help us out with that number.
And if not Mr. Farrell, Mr. Cinto's online as well.
Yeah, there's really not a league cutoff, but certain sports have different enrollment levels where you go up a division, down a division, and it's not set in stone exactly for each sport. Like it's not 450 for each sport. It kind of varies by sport. So there really isn't maybe Mr. Cinto can jump in, but there's not a league requirement or anything of that nature. We just fit right now in our league in terms of enrollment.
Okay, thank you.
So if we were to reduce our class sizes or our district population, student population, I would see that possibly some electives would go away then as well. Is that correct?
Mr. Cinto, can you talk a little bit about the high school enrollment and the elective schedules and impacts on reduction potentially of the number of students at your school?
Yeah. So right now, I think we're at about 478 students, something around there. It's difficult to just say if particular electives would go away because we've run electives with 4 kids and we run electives with 34 kids. So I think one of the challenges there is not challenges, but our commitment is to provide opportunities for students to excel and do the courses that they want. We have a pretty high graduation requirement as well that requires, 50 elective credits. So, from year to year, prescription to certain courses changes. So it's hard to say that we would have to necessarily cut electives. We might look at different ways to redistribute students more equitably, but the challenge with that is then you sometimes end up with students not taking the courses that they want. But I'd say what's helped in that domain is identifying, career pathways that kind of helps those teachers know who's up and coming and continuing in those programs. I know I've met with our choral and band teacher recently to talk about ways to increase student enrollment in their program, which I think establishing directors across the 612 has helped. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we need to cut anything, because what drives our master schedule is course requests. And sometimes we have to have students change courses, but by and large, our first goal is making sure kids get what they want.
Thank you.
Oh,
I'm wondering whether anyone knows whether reducing enrollment through the DOC would affect our ability would affect our COVID preparedness, essentially.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, just whether having less students in the classroom would improve COVID preparedness or improve the financial strain on our budget or anything like that.
Okay. Ms. Stubbs, could you go back to the slide that shows the DOC caps and the current enrollment? So the right-hand column are the number of students in each of those, will be the number of students in each of those grades next year. Okay? And that's without any DOC. The idea around withdrawing from district of choice would impact the district starting 22-23.
Correct.
22-23. Gosh, I hope we don't have any COVID pandemic in 22-23. Just saying. The discontinue of DOC would be a gradual decline. Ms. Madrigal, do you recall how many students were admitted through DOC this last year?
No, I do not have that information.
The 124 total that we currently have, each year a few, some students are added because they're across all of the grade levels. So I don't know that leaving DOC would support COVID preparedness, and it will be a gradual decline of enrollment, potentially, unless people move into the area or the board makes a decision to use some other process.
And just for clarification, the students that come into our high school from Hell Mountain and Pope Valley are not in these DOC numbers. Also, students who are children of employees are not in these numbers, correct?
Correct.
Ms. Madrigal, can I confirm that with you about the high school? If they were DOC K-8, do they stay DOC at the high school?
No, they do not. Their district of choice status is removed once they go into the high school. However, when the district adopted the district of choice program, all of the existing children of employees were grandfathered in as DOC employees. So if you made it before that mark, you are a DOC family. We always encourage our staff members to apply for DOC. However, it's not required. They can get in through the Allen bill. So there are some that are DOC and some that are not.
And just more information about the students who come to us from Hell and Pope, there's no funding that follows them either.
And so then
It's ninth graders.
So then some of our employees' children's are DOC and some are in Allenville, and the Allenville students are not part of this 124 number that we're seeing right now.
Correct.
Correct.
I have a couple clarifying on that slide number 5 as well. For some reason, I'm not understanding the TK-12 total enrollment is 1176. The DOC cap is one more than that. I don't know why I'm not comprehending why that is one more than total enrollment. What am I missing here?
Well,
We have currently we have, can you go to the slide that I was referring to earlier? Not that one, the one, so currently if you look at, for next year, if you look at first grade,
Okay.
We have 2 open seats in
Okay.
first grade for potentially for DOC.
Okay.
And if you look at ninth grade, we have quite a few open seats.
Right. Okay.
That doesn't resolve your one-person question, though, which I am not able to answer. Ms. Stubbs, do you?
I believe that at the particular point in time in which we captured the exact enrollment, it was the
Okay.
1176. I'll go back and clarify
Okay.
that. Yep.
And my second question, just that I'm understanding this all correctly, is it's, as we were talking about, it's about $27,000 that we're paying for every student that's that is, you said there were 69 DOC students that do not have the funding that follows them, or that $2,000 comes from them. So we're basically, if you doing the math, we're paying 27,000 times 69 students to cover educating those 69 students, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So in looking overall, if we average everything out, we're getting less than $1,000 per student for those students
Right.
enrolled in DOC, if we look at it overall.
I have 3 clarifying questions that I would like to ask. The first of which, on slide 14, do you mind clarifying what a student's school career would be? Would that be when they graduate, or if they decided to leave the district, they would not be allowed back? Should we withdraw from the DOC program?
My understanding is that if they were to leave, they would not be allowed back. Is that true, Dr. Wilson?
That is
Knowledge?
correct. If a district of choice family disenrolls from our district, they do not maintain the district of choice status.
Thank you. My second question, do we have a breakdown by grade level of the current DOC students? So say we have X amount of DOC students in grade 9, X amount in grade 10.
We do. I don't believe we've included it in this particular presentation. I can provide that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Madrigal, you wanted to respond to Trustee Pelosi's questions.
Correct. Andy, I'm going to share my screen for just one moment, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. So this item is from the District of Choice report that was provided to the board in November.
Okay.
And you'll see on this far right-hand side, you'll see that the enrollment caps total for the entire school is 1,177. And to the left of it, it shows the actuals, who's actually enrolled. And so you'll see in kindergarten, we're 19 over cap, where in others we're over and under. And so you'll see that is why we are 1 over the enrollment cap for the entire school.
Thank you so very much.
That is where I pulled those numbers, and then that also shows the grade level breakdown,
Right,
doesn't
it
it?
does.
That shows Joe's question, too.
Yeah.
And a total of 32 were granted DOC spots last year,
Okay.
and 94 applied.
All right.
Thank you, Ms. Madrigal. You are the expert in this.
I have a question about the report, the LAO report, and how it talks about the possible funding rate getting increased to a higher rate. What's the likelihood of that, and when would we be able to know if that is something that would happen?
Well, if the legislature, as I mentioned and shared the information from our school services representative who described that it would probably need to be a district that had a pressing interest in this, taking it to a legislator and then, drafting a bill and supporting that and so forth. If that happened, then the legislature would be looking back at that LAO report, which they actually commissioned with the 2017 reauthorization, and they would see that recommendation to increase funding, and they would likely increase the funding, but I haven't seen anything that indicates what the amount might be. I can go back and review the full LAO report and see if I can find something that might suggest that and add that as a follow-up.
So basically, it would hinge on more of a district following up to pass that. So it's not something that's more likely to happen unless someone
Yes,
or a district tries to push it through.
yes, and I do know that there are a couple of districts out there for whom this is a pressing issue. They really do need that district of choice revenue for a variety of reasons, and so it could be that there is a district out there that wants to, really push this. And in fact, I can check in with our school services advisors because there is the Schools for Sound Finance. There's quite a bit of discussion and talk at that level, so I can follow up and learn more about it.
However, at the same time, wouldn't it be difficult for certain legislators to actually take up the DOC legislation because they might have conflicting interests within their boundaries? Other districts, I mean, of course, the districts that want the DOC are often doing it at the expense of districts who want the revenue of keeping their students there, often larger districts. So I personally, I don't know if there would be a legislator that in our area that would be willing to take this up because there would be districts that would be opposed to the DOC.
And honestly, I mean, that was one of my questions as well. But when you look at how well funded most basic aid districts are, and I think somebody who's willing to maybe take that argument or fight, if you will, further up to a legislator, I mean, my gut is telling me that, you would look at we spend per pupil to what somebody who's not in a basic aid district, and there's major disparity. And I can't imagine that somebody's going to turn around and say, we're going to give you $7,000 more per student to educate this. I don't know. I think it's hopeful thinking, but I don't know. I don't sense it's coming, given all the money that's having to be injected into public education from COVID. When you read the governor's budget and all the things that they're trying to infuse across, I don't know where other money's going to come from. And that's just more of a commentary. It's not a question or, but I don't know. It seems unlikely.
I would agree with you, Lisa. I just think that those districts that are not basic aid, basically they're losing over $7,000 for every student that goes to a basic aid district, a DOC district. So they're not going to be promoting that legislation.
I don't know that we would be a good poster child for that initiative, considering how our unique combination of being well-funded and small.
Good point, Forrest. Do we have any further questions?
I have one more
Yes.
clarifying question. Should the district choose to withdraw from DOC, would we need to immediately substitute it with a different program or policy like interdistrict transfer, or is that at the discretion of the board?
We currently have an interdistrict policy in place.
Okay.
You'll recall, board members, we worked on that quite a bit 2 years ago.
Great. Thank you.
So, but was that specifically for our students that were kind of in limbo, the interdistrict policy at that time? Kind of limbo between district to choice, our avid students? I mean, would we be starting an interdistrict agreement? Would we start it over as far as kind of all of the procedures and things of it?
If you wanted to make that consideration as a board, I would recommend that we bring legal counsel in to work with us on creating, if you wanted to create something different than what you currently have in place. The current interdistrict transfer policy is aligned with law, and you'll recall that it has a handful of reasons why a student would be enrolled in our district. if they are subject to bullying or harassment and there are no schools within their attendance area that can serve them. If they are, Erica, help me please, Ms. Madrigal, if they are military. And the third one is?
To continue the current school year. So that policy is attached to the board agenda as well. So the three are the student, as Dr. Wilson said, the bullying or sexual harassment, a senior who is allowed to continue their education, and then a student who has moved during the school year, they can remain here for the remainder of the school year.
Right.
And foster children as well?
Yes.
That is by the McKinney-Vento bill,
Different
and that
policy.
is completely separate from inter-district transfers.
That bill covers both foster and homeless?
Correct.
So if you are interested in something different, we would need to, again, I would want to look for legal advice to ensure that whatever you decide to do can be upheld by the law.
One last clarifying question I have. If we decide to disenroll from district of choice in the 22-23 school year, does our funding for our current district of choice students that will continue with us cease?
Yes, I believe it would cease. I'll confirm that, but I'm pretty certain it would cease.
President Haug, I do have one member of the public who would like to comment. If you want to hear that now or later, please let me know. It's Mr. Farrell.
Oh, yes. Go ahead, Mr. Farrell.
Yeah, I think my question was actually answered by Dr. Wilson, but I want to make sure. So when you refer to getting legal advice about how to change a program potentially from district of choice to another program, you're referring to setting up the program for some of the good things that have come out of district of choice, which was a lottery system and a fair and equitable system to get chosen. Is that what you're referring to?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Trustee.
Mr. Farrell, thank you for saying that, because if we were to do something like that, that's certainly some of the parameters that I would like to see if we do decide to do an interdistrict agreement, so that it's equitable. Because that was one of the reasons why we discontinued interdistrict and went to the DOC, was because of that, because it was not.
We didn't have an equitable program in the first place. Went to an equitable program, but also inherited some of these issues that I kind of fumbled around earlier. Mm-hmm. And then it seems to me that the fair and equitable process could be included in a better policy. I guess that's what my members would be for.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification.
Ms. Madrigal, can you share some more information about IDAs?
Sure. We currently have several programs in place for out-of-district students. We have the District of Choice program. We have IDA agreements, and we listed those details earlier. We also have MOUs with our neighboring districts to serve some of those as well. And then we have the Allen Bill. So those are all of the programs that we currently have for out-of-district students. So we do currently have an existing IDA policy with those items involved.
So in reference to the Allen Bill, so is it, I was just reading about that in the LAO, I think it's in one of the reports that was attached, and it states that districts may accept transfers based on parental employment who are at least one parent employed within the boundaries for at least 10 hours during the school week. So does this word "may" mean that we can choose which ones? Like right now, we're with Allen Bill. It's our employees with children. So does that open it up where then now we would now need to open it up to any family who has a parent working in the St. Helena Unified School District boundaries?
I would need to look at that a little bit more carefully.
And Ms. Madrigal and I worked with legal counsel on that when we worked on this policy. And so there are two options with the Allen bill. And Ms. Madrigal, if I'm missing something, I'll let you fill in. So you can use the Allen bill for students of employees within the school district only. And you can also use the Allen bill to allow students to attend your schools of when one of the parents works within the attendance area of the school district. Typically, that option is used in LCFF, local control funding districts, because they want to increase their enrollment. So at the time when we made the recommendation to use the Allen bill for employees, it was not my recommendation to use both of them. It was my recommendation to use the Allen bill for employees of the district only. Ms. Madrigal, did I miss any part of that?
No, that's correct.
So we would not have to bring in the second part of this if we discontinue district of choice?
You do not, no.
Okay, great, thank you.
Trustee Kerr, is one of your senses is that if DOC goes away, that we're eliminating a pool of potential applicants? Is that what am I sensing that you're concerned about missing some people that normally would apply through DOC who don't fit any of these qualifications for an IDA? Is that a concern that you have? That's what I was kind of reading between the lines. Maybe it's not.
Well, I think that just my concern was that I didn't actually want to, and I'm saying this very respectfully when I say this, I didn't want to open up the floodgates to our families who are working in St. Helena, but they live in Napa, where then all of a sudden it was necessary for them to come into our district just because of the Allen bill. Yes. That was kind of with that.
And just for further clarification, there is no funding following students that are coming to us via the Allen bill.
Correct.
Correct.
So do we have any more questions or clarifications? Can we, I know that we're spending a lot of time on this. Can we start some discussion? And feedback, what I'd like to hear what everyone feels, how we should move forward, the instructions we should plan for, keeping in mind that we're not voting on anything, but we're asking the administration to start planning to go a certain direction and find more information out. Is that correct?
Yes, we are seeking direction from you tonight. So that could look like we need more information. We want you to bring this back to another board meeting so we can ask additional questions. If you have a consensus of direction that actually you want us to move toward, then that direction would give us our next steps. So what information do you need that's, would help with your decision-making process as we move forward?
So what I'd like to know is if first of all, does anyone feel that we need to receive more information on this agenda item?
Well, similar to Joe, I was kind of hoping that we would see a breakdown of the DOC per grade to kind of see when it starts fading, what is the progression of the students moving out of our district? Oh, wait, where do you saw them?
I think time just kind of sitting with it a little more.
Right, exactly, yeah. And I want I want the total, not just on the annual, I want the total of each grade right now. And I'll let's talk about that. Go ahead.
So I think initially looking at this, when I was looking at the report, I think I was kind of leaning towards continuing the DOC, and a lot of that was hinged on the fact that there would potentially be more funding. So I think obviously, I think in the report it said that it allowed for more opportunities for low-income families and English language learners, which I know it's harder to support those students, but I think it also gives those families an opportunity. So that part of me was looking at it from that side. But now, obviously, looking at or hearing some of the follow-up information, I just think that right now, with the way our district is kind of heading, with the next portion of our agenda being with the budget and potential, drop in taxes and all that, I just think that if it were to remain the same, it seems like too much of a disparity to, if we're spending, I think it's at 29,000 per student and we're only receiving 2,000. That's a huge amount. And I think for right now that we're trying to kind of project and forecast for the future, we want to kind of make sure that we can ensure a lot of the services and opportunities for the students that do live here. And it saddens me to say that, but I mean, just right now, that's kind of, I think, where we're at with the district. And so I think, yeah, just for those reasons, I think that I would be more inclined to look at disregarding or stopping the DOC and looking at other options.
So I think my mindset when I came here today was really, I thought was just more about fact finding and discussion. I don't even know if I'm still confident to give one direction one way or another right now. I too would like to spend a little more time with the breakdown. I just had another thought that lost, but aside to Julio's point, when you put on your business hat and you're looking at this, it's $1.8 million that we're spending to educate these students. And we are in the business of education. So, I mean, again, it's not any disrespect and it's a very hard balance. But when you look at that, it doesn't make a lot of business sense to outlay almost $2 million for educating when our budget potentially is going to decrease, significantly in the outgoing years. And a lot of things in our budget don't decrease because those are salaries and benefits and things like that. So those are all those things that have to come out in the wash, of which we don't really know right now what that looks like. So it's a gamble. I personally I guess when I saw we had to make a decision by September 16th, I realized that we weren't voting on anything tonight. I just would like a little more time to sit with it, to look at that interdistrict transfer agreement policy. Maybe we do need to make sure we've got everything in there that everybody feels comfortable with. I've read it multiple times in the last few days, and it seems solid, but I just feel like we owe it to our students and to our district and to ourselves to make sure we all feel good with that. So I respectfully just request we revisit it one more time. That's what I would personally like.
And Forrest?
I think it would have been helpful to have this discussion after the budget discussion, just because that would give more context. But from what I remember of the previous budget discussions that we've had, the amount that we would save discontinuing would be about the same as what we would lose on our budget over the course of the next couple of years under the most catastrophic version of that budget projection. So I'm on the fence because I always want to lean towards helping the most number of students. And I think it is a really good opportunity to help those disadvantaged students from other areas who might not have the same opportunities. So I think it would be good to have more information and more discussion.
So I think that we're all looking for a little bit more information. Jeannie and everyone that wanted specific information, if you could make sure that information is, or Dr. Wilson, you're ready to read out the information that you heard tonight?
This is what I've heard, and then let me know if I missed something. You'd like to review the number of district of choice students by grade level, totals by grade level. You'd like to review and discuss the current interdistrict policy and you would like to have this on a future agenda for further information and discussion at least one more time.
Yes, so I
Yes.
think that if we have it as an information item within the next 3 to 4 months, and then if possible, or if necessary, if we need to have another information item, we would still have time to do that in between now and September. So at least, I think that one agenda item on a regular board meeting will be enough. But we'll plan it so that in case we need more discussion, we'll have time to do that as well. How does that sound to everyone?
Sounds fine to me.
You know, and the thing that I didn't say that I was waiting for everyone else is, personally, from what everyone has said, I agree with that. I mean, because I just feel it's like we have an opportunity as a district to educate students regardless of where they live, and I think that that's really important. I think that's really important. I'm really concerned about the families that have siblings that might be where they have a child who's in second grade, and then they have a brother who's who's 3 years old. That's not going to have the opportunity to go. That's going to have to go to a different school, and that's concerning to me because we've always have looked after our students and our families, and I think that I feel like we're just kind of brushing them aside. I mean, these are real people, and they're part of what we do as a district, as a school. So that's that, and you can kind of tell that this is really rattling me. So I'm going to stop there.
And kind
Go
of,
ahead, Julia.
can I clarify on something that she said? For sibling, or obviously kids that are district of choice now, their siblings aren't guaranteed a spot anymore, right? Because they would have to basically be picked in the lottery to be in the district.
Correct. They do have,
So they still
that
have-
is one of the priority areas within DOC. The first priority is free or reduced lunch, and then a sibling and Erica military.
Actually, it's a correction. The first priority is the district of choice siblings. The
Thank you.
second is free and reduced lunch, and the third is military.
So thank you for clarifying.
So
that.
currently, if there is a second grader that is attending our school through DOC, and the family has an incoming kindergartner, they would need to apply for DOC for that kindergartner. And from the priorities, remember how we divide them up by, the lottery divides them up by the priorities. And so the DOC sibling would be in the first lottery for the kindergarten grade level. And if you discontinued district of choice and there was a second grader or a first grader or whatever grade that's with us, and at some point the family has another child, that child would not follow the sibling because district of choice would no longer be in place. And that's in alignment with your concern.
Right. So they just wouldn't have that. They wouldn't have a chance to get in.
I would like to add one more question for our future agenda item to consider would be the forecast for learning loss, how long learning loss recovery will take due to COVID, and into the 22-23 school year, do we expect to still be dealing with learning loss, and would smaller class sizes help that?
Well, and it just comes back again. It's like, how small do we want our classes, though? I mean, if we're at 14 or 15 at the primary elementary school, I mean, if we and we're declining in our enrollment, are we, do we want to have classes that are 12, 13 children, or do we want to go up to 21, 22, so we're not having not hiring another teacher?
So remember that this year, the reason that we have the class size as low as
Well,
we
yeah,
do
exactly.
is that all of our specialists,
Right.
3 of our specialists and our 2 academic intervention teachers at the primary and elementary are teaching a class. So we added another class at every grade level in primary and elementary. And that's why the numbers are as low as they are.
Right.
At the middle school and the high school, we added that 8th period, and our teachers are teaching an additional period at the middle school and the high school, and that's why the numbers are lower at the middle school and the high school right now.
Did you go ahead?
In theory, we'll be reverting back to our regular 4 classes per grade when the COVID situation is over.
That is our forever deep rooted wish and desire. I am compelled. And we have already started the discussion with Dr. Reluccio, our public health officer, on guidance for the 21-22 school year. And as Mr. Heller reminded me today, the state is not really focused on the new school year, 21-22, because they're still trying to get schools back to in-person instruction across the state. And so we just don't have guidance yet, and we are not ready and able to plan.
And I'm sorry, and I just want to say my comment was it was post-pandemic with local class sizes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any final comments or questions, knowing that we could add information to our upcoming board agenda item if you think of anything else you might need?
I just wanted to add a little tidbit to that last discussion we were just having, just that I think it's important that we continue to plan as if COVID's just going to be forever, because we don't know when it's going to end.
Thank you. So I would like to take a 3-minute standing break, because we don't want to take longer than that, because we have a lot to get through with the budget. Okay, 3 minutes, and we'll be back at 5:40. the meeting on to part 2 of our study session, and that is our budget development. I'd like to call on Mrs. Andy Stubbs again.
Thank you. To start our budget section, I'd like to provide a little bit of review. We were told last spring that when the pandemic hit, we should begin running some planning scenarios showing 0% property tax growth in 2021-22 and 2022-23 at a minimum due to the pandemic. And then in November, our property tax revenues came in lower than expected for this year due to the wildfires. They came in at 1.86%, and we were expecting at least 3% with the November property tax certification. And so consequently, the board approved a first interim report in December with a 0% growth in the 2 out years, which, as you can see, resulted in a sizable budgetary deficit in 21-22 of almost $500,000, and then a significant budgetary deficit of $1.7 million in 22-23. And I would like to point out, it was brought to my attention right before this meeting started that there is an error on the slide. And the error would be in the column 22-23, and the figure for the ending balance is incorrect. That's a typo. It should read $7,643,567. And so I apologize. I'm grateful for that being pointed out. This information was copied from another report. The reports are accurate. And what I'll do is make a revision and then post that after the study session. The rest of the numbers, as I look back at the original first interim report, are correct. And so while we are able to meet our budgetary reserve, as you can see and as we've discussed a little bit during the study session already, if we do not see any growth with our property taxes, we will need to do something to mitigate that budgetary deficit. And then in January, the county CBOs met with John Tudor, the Napa County Assessor, and Josh Schultz, the Deputy Superintendent for the Napa County Office of Education, to receive an update on property tax revenues. And their recommendation, as shown in the excerpt from a message provided by the Napa County Office of Education, is that districts should continue to plan for a 0% increase in 2021-22 and 2022-23 for the reasons shown. First of all, the impact from the wildfires, declines in the value of some business properties due to the pandemic, and no additional rebound effect from the years of the Great Recession. Now, John Tudor recognizes that home sales are up in the county, and in fact, I believe I saw a news report some time ago that home sales within Napa County were up about 25%. And for that reason, he doesn't believe that we need to budget for a decrease in property tax revenue. However, he would rather that school districts budget for that 0% growth in the 2 out years, and then hopefully we'll see some increase, which will be good news for us, rather than over budgeting and have a significant situation if revenues don't come in where we want them to. So consequently, you see in the preview of the multi-year projection that will be included in the second interim report that will go to the board on March 11th, a draft that looks very similar to what we saw with the first interim report. Now, between December and now, we've gone through and we've reviewed all of our counts again and made some small changes, and the net impact is a slight increase to the surplus for this year, and then approximately a $20,000 increase to the deficit in the 2 out years. And that's primarily due to the most significant change that we'll talk about when I present the second interim report to the board on March 11th, would be I did increase the contribution to food services by about $60,000, because over the past year we've provided more meals, we've increased our labor, And then we've just learned that the state and the federal government are going to be providing us with 75 cents additional reimbursement per meal for the period of March 13th through August of this past year. And so we likely won't need all of that $60,000, but at the time I wanted to increase the contribution just to make sure we were covered. And then I carried that in the out years. And so that's why we see a net increase to the deficit of about $20,000 in each of those out years. But again, these numbers look very similar to what you saw with the first interim multi-year projection. And then this slide shows all of the assumptions included in the second interim. It includes the same freezes that we talked about with the first interim report. We're freezing the contributions to Fund 14 and Fund 40 for capital outlay and deferred maintenance temporarily, and then the Future Ready classrooms. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we might build those programs back in as we learn more about our property tax revenue. And then now I'd like to share with you just some of the highlights of the governor's proposal for the 2021-22 state budget. The governor released his proposals for 2021-22 on January 8th, and the good news is that there will be more money for education, which is needed particularly for academic intervention and recovery post-pandemic. We've talked already about the additional 75 cents per meal for breakfast and lunch that we will be receiving for the period of March through August 2020. And then the state will be providing more funds to help teachers with professional development, and they also have a teacher pipeline program where they are trying to recruit and retain more teachers because there continues to be a statewide shortage of teachers. Additionally, the governor proposes additional funding for mental health and school climate surveys, recognizing the challenges that so many students, families, and staff have faced during the pandemic. And then specifically for us, we anticipate receiving approximately $847,000 in one-time funding that is restricted but fairly flexible, and that would be part of the governor's, the federal government stimulus package. And that would be associated with our Title I allocation. It's based on a calculation from that. And this would be the second round of funding. The first round of funding of this type of money gave us approximately $178,000, which we were able to use on our COVID measures. And then in addition to the ESSER Round 2 funding that I just described, the state is proposing expanded learning and academic intervention grants. And these two would be one-time restricted funds totaling about $821,000. Combined with the ESSER, that would be almost $1.7 million in restricted one-time monies that we could use, for example, to if we have to sustain smaller class sizes due to COVID-19 requirements and so forth, or if we're trying to increase the school day next year, we could use those funds to provide extra staffing to be able to do that. And we would have, I believe, a couple of years to spend that money. The governor also has his proposal for reopening schools, a grant which could potentially total about $508,000 for us. And this is part of the reopening incentive that is open for schools that are just now reopening or those that have been reopened. And what we've learned is that the LAO's counter proposal to the governor's proposal states that districts that are already open and they have their COVID prevention program plan, which we do, and MOUs with their bargaining units in place that align with that, which we do, those districts would be grandfathered in, and they would not be required to do the asymptomatic student testing that other school districts would be that don't have that in place already. And so that would be huge for us because a lot of those funds potentially would have to go for asymptomatic testing if there was a strict requirement about that. So we're waiting to learn more information about the application process and what that will look like. It's still being processed through the legislative action. With regard to PERS and STIRS, we got a very small break with our CalPERS. If you look at the 2021-22 column, they were going to be charging employers 24.9% there. That was an increase from the previous year, and instead that increase is 23%. We get a little bit more of a break with STIRS. Previous investments are reducing the employer contribution from 18.10% to 15.92% in 21-22, and then it goes back up to 18% in 22-23. So thanks to previous investments, we've been able to reduce our employer contribution to STIRS, which has helped our budget. And those factors are all included in the multi-year projection that you saw. I always like to include a slide about the reserves just to remind our school community how very important it is to maintain strong reserves. And the pandemic and the wildfires have illustrated that need because now we're looking at a potential financial situation which our reserves will help us and potentially help carry us through that. So earlier this year, we've talked in alignment with the first interim report, in addition to having the board approve a multi-year projection that showed 0% growth in the 2 out years. The board also approved working with the Business Operations Committee to develop what I'm calling a dynamic deficit mitigation plan. And the idea there is that we need to have a plan to address that deficit in the out years. We certainly will want to use an appropriate portion of the reserve for that, but we will also need to identify a target amount for possible budget reductions. And then we need to include a restatement plan as financial conditions improve. We want to look at what items we'll want to bring back into the budget. So, for example, the contribution to deferred maintenance or Future Ready Classrooms program. I think the key feature here is that we need to wait and learn more about the future of our property taxes. So I'm going to want to continue to check in with John Tudor and Josh Schultz on a regular basis because when we get more positive information, that changes our financial outlook and that changes what we need to be thinking about in terms of budget reductions and use of the reserve. So I would like to spend a little bit of time drilling down and taking a look at the timeline and tasks over the next few months. So the first 2 rows that we see here talk about some of the things that we're doing this spring. Right now, I'm already beginning to comb through the budget and categorize expenditures based on whether these are restricted expenditures or operational, for example, gas and electricity, or if they're possibly flexible and they could be potentially evaluated for a possible budget reduction. And then along with HR and our site administrators, we're continually evaluating staffing and enrollment and determining what future needs might be there. And then, as I've mentioned earlier this evening, the board will be considering approval of the second interim report on March 11th, and the day before that, our Business Operations Committee meeting will meet, and we'll go through highlights from tonight's study session, see a preview of the second interim report, see the 2021-22 budget assumptions for the first time, and then also look at a very small list of possible summer projects. And we would be using our existing maintenance dollars to cover those projects. It would mainly be for safety, repairs and things like that, but we don't want to dip into our reserve for those projects, so it'll be a real small scope of things that we do this summer. In April, we will receive our second property tax certification report. However, and while the first report that we received in November was conservative, I'm told from the Napa County Office of Education that we shouldn't see much of an increase here. So we may see something a little bit higher, but not any big significant growth. And then in April, the board will have the opportunity to review and approve the summer projects list and see the budget assumptions if there's been any changes. Business Operations Committee will meet again in April and continue their work in beginning to develop that deficit mitigation plan. In May, we'll have the governor's May revision of the state budget, followed by the public hearing of our own district budget, along with the LCAP public hearing, with final approval of the district budget and the LCAP in June. In August, we'll receive our final property tax report for this year, for 2021, and then during the early part of the fall, that's when the Business Operations Committee will be doing most of its work to review all of our expenditures and then make a list of possible reductions. And the most important period of time is going to be November 2021 when we receive the property tax certification report for 21-22. And then we will see if perhaps our property taxes came in at 2% or 2.5% or what have you, and that will inform the first interim report for 2021-22, and that will inform kind of that target amount by which we need to identify some possible reductions for 22-23 and beyond. When I work with the Business Operations Committee, I'm going to want to use some tools to help them in that decision-making and recommendation-making process. And so I reached out to School Services, the district's financial independent advisor, and they shared with me a really good matrix that we'll be able to use with the committee, whereby we will go through all of those expenditures that are that have some flexibility in nature, and we will use this kind of matrix and rating process for each of those items. We would then rate those and prepare a recommendation for the board, and then include the estimated cost savings along with our first interim report that would go to the County Office of Education next December. And again, my biggest hope is that as we gain more information about our property tax revenue, we're able to modify this plan, and perhaps we just need to utilize a certain portion of the reserve for the couple of years. We won't have to make any reductions in the classroom. That's my biggest hope, but we do have to go through this process just in case we do need to implement some reductions. And we'll work very slowly and thoughtfully with the Business Operations Committee and then bring those recommendations to the board. Some other things to consider, as I mentioned, we'll be following up very frequently with John Tudor and with Josh Schultz to get updates on our property taxes. We do have negotiations for 2022-23 coming up with the district's bargaining units. And we will also want to meet with our parent-teacher groups and the St. Helena Public Schools Foundation to collaborate on the most effective use of all of our resources together, and just make sure that they're aware of our budget and what we want to do to work together to ensure that we can continue to provide students with a high-quality education that we've been giving them for many, many years now. We'll want to discuss field trips, teacher grants, extracurricular needs, and so forth. And so with that, I would ask if the board had any questions and offer these points for discussion: providing feedback on the dynamic deficit mitigation plan, our timeline and tasks, and our budget reduction decision-making tools.
So at this point, I would like to open the meeting to public comment. I believe that Erica is able to let people make public comment at this time.
Yes, President Howe. There were no members of the public who submitted any written comment this evening. If there are any participants in the audience who care to comment on this agenda item, please hover towards the bottom of your screen and raise your virtual hand now. There's no public comment.
Thank you, Erica. Trustees, comments and questions?
So thank you very much. Thank you for the information. So I'm going to first start with the possible income that we might be coming in from the federal and the state. So it says on there that they're restricted. Now, what is the restriction on those funds? Not like the ESSER and the state.
So the current ESSER funds are very, very flexible, and I think a lot of the intent here with this funding is to support schools that have not yet reopened, to give them the resources that they need to do the things that we have already managed to do already. And so I think that with these dollars, we'll be able to use them for any additional COVID-19 response measures that we have, so we won't have to use our own general fund for those types of things. And then in addition, we'll be able to use them certainly for academic intervention to support students who receive special education services, English learners, those that qualify for free and reduced. So while they're restricted, they're really very, very flexible. The first round of funding was very flexible. It could be used for additional technology, for example. With regard to the state expanded learning time and academic intervention grants, those will be a little bit more restrictive in nature to what you see there. So supporting students in those groups and providing academic intervention. And if we can demonstrate, that the use of, if we're using those funds to provide more staffing, as long as we just read the guidelines and ensure that we're doing that in an allowable way, then the district will be compliant. And so we haven't quite seen a lot of detail on those allowable expenditures yet.
Okay.
But typically they'll be flexible enough to meet the needs that we've begun to talk about with more summer school and more support for students to provide some of that academic recovery. And then the reopening grant, again, I think that will probably be the least restrictive of all, because again, the primary intent of that is for districts who have not yet reopened, but it's still available for districts who have, and so it may be a way to kind of recoup some of the expenses that we've already put out. We haven't had to use very much of our general fund dollars because we did receive quite a bit in round one ESSER funding and some other pockets of money as well.
And the 75 cents, does that go directly into Fund 13, the cafeteria fund? And does that really have, I mean, that fund is always, how do we say, it's not underfunded, but we provide funding to balance it.
Yes.
So will that bring us any closer to a balance in that fund, or probably not?
Probably not. No, I'm anticipating it may be, my very preliminary calculations were maybe 25,000 or something in that neighborhood. So that'll help, but certainly our contribution is getting closer to $400,000 a year now as costs go up.
So that's coming from, that's what the district is putting in, is 400,000.
Approximately, yes.
Okay.
So it sounds as though we could use the ESSER, the second ESSER, and the state, or we could use those are pretty flexible accounts. And so as far as like, if we did like a really robust summer school, we could use both of those accounts. We could use the monies from both of those accounts to do that.
Yes, when I think about all the things that we've begun to talk about, expanded summer school, additional interventions, sustaining some of the licenses that go along with some of the hotspots that we've purchased, those kinds of things, all of those could fit within the parameters of these grants based on what I've seen already.
And this is a kind of a larger larger question. So I have out down here, what would be the scenario where we would use we would use budget reductions rather than reserve balances to get through any kind of deficit? And I know that you mentioned the matrix and things, and that would be kind of the guiding paperwork and things for that. So, but what scenario would you think as far as that?
So it really depends on the information that we get from John Tudor and Josh Schultz. And so if John Tudor, for example, 9 months from now says, I feel comfortable about you budgeting at 2% property tax growth in the out years. Then we reevaluate our finances and we do some projections. We determine that perhaps the reserve will carry us through until we can expect them to even exceed that. And so then we would focus on that target amount of reductions. And so our reserves are healthy enough, and I think it would be very appropriate given our collective desire to continue offering the highest quality programs that we can to our students, to use the reserves for the purpose for which we've been building them up all these years, which would be to carry us through. So what we would be trying to do would be identifying that target amount by which it didn't seem that property taxes were going to recoup, and we had to cut because it would be a structural deficit that would be going out several years. So that's why it's real hard to hone in on what that amount would be, but the plan would be to utilize reserves for a shorter term if we felt that it was only going to last for 2 or 3 years.
Kind of similar question with the matrix. Is that only going to be used by the business committee, or is there other groups or people that are going to look at it through the district to determine what those rankings?
I was thinking that because this is very serious work that involves the broader school community, I was actually thinking it would be appropriate to maybe expand the use of that to include probably more representatives from our bargaining units, and certainly the board. So I haven't quite thought about how I want to include other stakeholders, but I do think that would be important.
And I get a follow up with that. So is that matrix really going to look at more like the school programs, or is it going to look at services, or can you kind of give us examples that you guys would, or like what would be being ranked, I guess?
So it would be for things where there was some flexibility. A perfect example might be the $50,000 that we're currently contributing to our OPEB trust to support our post-employment retirement benefits. And so if we were taking that through the matrix, for example, the $50,000 that we contribute to the trust, it reduces our cost towards benefits, but it's not something that we have to do to be compliant. It's not really dependent on something else. It doesn't there's little benefit to students or is not applicable. So as you walk that sort of expenditure through this matrix, you can see where something like that would probably pretty quickly rise to the top of something that could be reduced or frozen for some period of time. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, as I mentioned before, I'm working with Chris and with our administrators to continually evaluate staffing and the future of our staffing needs. And so with pending retirements and things like that, there are always going to be some opportunities to consider reducing some staffing in some areas where it's not very impactful to students, but it's appropriate based on class size. If we're post-COVID, very small class size requirements and things like that without detracting from the benefits of having the smaller class sizes that we do. And so making some natural budget reductions as a result of attrition like that will first of all give us the biggest bang for the buck, and then also be very appropriate and keep things away from the classroom as much as possible. In fact, I would venture to say that if we're staffing very strategically and utilizing our reserves, it could be that target figure for additional possible cuts could be very small or even non-existent. So, for example, let's say property taxes next November come in at 2%. Well, that certainly reduces that projected deficit in the out year. And then if you can use a portion of the reserves and you've got some natural attrition, there could be really no amount that we identify that we need to make for additional cuts. But we want to begin to plan and start laying that groundwork just in case we have to.
Yeah, thank you, Julio. Those are great questions. One clarifying question as well, on this matrix. When you take this to the Business Operations Committee on the 10th of March, you will be attaching a list of items for the committee to consider versus all the stakeholders bringing their ideas, correct?
Yes, and I won't quite have that list ready for March or even
Okay.
possibly for April. The
Okay.
March and April meetings, I want to introduce them to these ideas and start setting the stage and begin that conversation around what other stakeholders should we involve. And additionally, it'll take me a little bit more time to really comb through every single, expenditure. And so it could be maybe our first meeting in September, because we've only got a couple of months to go. It could be May or maybe September that I can bring to them a discrete list of expenses. And I say, here's everything that we have that we consider to be restricted, so we can't touch that. Special education costs, for example. Here are operational costs, for example, utilities or water. There could be some natural ways to realize some savings there. We can dig down a little bit deeper. And then here are some anticipated attrition savings that we might have, so we would want to bring that to light too, to the extent that we can. And then finally, here are some more discretionary expenses, if you will, that we, for example, the OPEB trust, or looking at how much we spend on classroom supplies or something like that. I don't want to throw out any examples preemptively. Right, but those types of things. So they would see a list of all those expenses, and then we would have a process for going through this review process and evaluating them.
So my question goes more to slide 24. And I know we're looking at there is a reduction in the required contribution to PERS and STIRS due to the pandemic, but at the same time, I feel that that's kind of just kicking the can down the road. We're going to have to eventually catch up on those contributions. I'll wait until, or everyone has 24, slide 24. And what also, frankly, concerns me is that we're looking at possible reductions in revenue, but we have to look also at the percentage increases that we're seeing in our benefits, in STIRS, PERS, and our medical benefits, and also our salary increases going forward. And so what I see, and this is something that I've seen before, is frankly our salaries and our benefits packages is becoming it's increasing at a faster rate than our budget increases, even in our best years. So even when we're increasing our revenue at 5 and 6%, that portion of our budget is increasing at a higher rate. And I see that happening over the past 6 years. So what I see happening as a result, and and it's nothing that we can really change. The medical benefits are going to increase, and what we have to contribute to STRS and PERS is going to increase at a higher rate than our revenue increase. But how do we ensure that we can maintain our facilities when we have a smaller portion every year to donate to our other expenditures? And this is something that is frankly concerned me for years. So I know that it's very hard to address it right now with COVID and looking at a zero revenue increase. But I think at some point we have to start looking at the portion of our budget that is increasing at a faster rate than our revenue. Does that make sense?
It does, and certainly when we were in the last round of negotiations and evaluating how much we could grant for a raise, we factored in the estimated cost of medical benefits, statutory benefits, all those kinds of things, and so we set a threshold and included all that in the multi-year projection so that we would not exceed that threshold, so that we would not be overspending. However, we didn't anticipate, and we planned on a conservative factor for property taxes, saying, well, if we budget at 3% property tax growth, can we cover these additional salary expenses and medical benefit expenses? And in fact, I always budget for an increase of our medical benefits of 10%. However, it has not come in that high in recent years. And so we factor all that into our multi-year projection. What we didn't count on was the impact, of course, of the pandemic and the wildfires, and then bringing it so far potentially below even what we were planning during the years of the Great Recession. But to your point, we also have to ensure that we have high-quality, well-maintained facilities, and we keep them in good repair, because otherwise we have much heftier replacement costs if we don't tend to them ongoing.
I think also to that effect, I just see that every year that portion of our budget always increases, whereas things like our budget for our field trips does not increase by the same amount. So we do increase it, and we do prioritize field trips, but we don't see the budget. We don't have control over certain things, but my concern is when we have one portion of the budget growing and another portion that is very important to our students, such as field trips, grows at a slower rate compared to employee benefits, and that's something that I've wanted to keep in perspective when we're discussing the budget.
Ms. Stubbs, has the percentage of the budget that goes towards employee benefits and salaries, has that changed over the course of the last number of years?
Actually, it's stayed at approximately 82-83%. I would have to do a little bit of analysis, but it actually, the ratio has stayed at about that amount, somewhere between 79 and 82%.
Which is actually lower than it was like in 2010. In 2010, it was like 90% of our budget was for salaries and compensation and benefits. So.
And my understanding across the state is that the average is higher than what our percentage is. Andy, do you have any input on that piece?
I wouldn't want to put out a figure without being accurate. At a high level, I believe that is correct, that the state figure is higher.
Any other questions or comments?
No, thank you very much, because I know this is a lot of work on everybody's behalf, and Annie, particularly for you. And you always make it so palatable. So I just wanted to just say thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Do you want to go to that final slide one more time, just to make sure that the board has direction as to any directions they need to give you? So you see there that any feedback on the mitigation plan, timeline and tasks, and the tools. And we've heard some feedback. Want to just make sure that you've had the opportunity to give all the feedback you'd like to.
So is everyone happy with the timeline that was presented this evening? I thought that that was really well laid out, Andy. I just think it's very, very well planned.
I would agree. I like the timeline and the tasks and the responsible party. I thought that was super helpful. So I'm comfortable with that and myself on that aspect.
Yeah, I think for the dynamic deficit mitigation plan, I think it's important, and I'm glad that you'll be collaborating with the bargaining units, just so that they also see the angle that, why we're planning for this. And I think it's important that we collectively work together to get through this. I know it's difficult, and we haven't been in this scenario, I don't know, ever, but I think it's appropriate that all parties are well informed and can communicate and work together to figure out something to hopefully we won't have to use.
And in addition to that, certainly including the parent-teacher groups and foundation and things is very, very much appreciated. Just so that they're aware of what's going on as well, kind of where we're at. So thank you.
Is there a Give Big representative on that budget operation committee?
We have a representative from the foundation and from the parent groups.
Okay, that's enough crossover, I would feel. Okay, thank.
And we do have bargaining unit representation on that group too, but the idea of expanding that to include additional stakeholders, I think, would be important.
And honestly, I mean, the deficit mitigation plan, I'm comfortable with it as well. I think it's a really fluid plan, right? So, as much as what we're all talking about tonight, everything is it's going to go like this, and we think we're going down this river, and then all of a sudden it's just going to change course. So, it seems like you're allowing for those things in these plans. So that's what I was looking for. Like, if we hit this fork, we got to go this way. What do we have lined up? And from what I'm reading, it seems like that is in place. So, because you could be throwing curveballs every month, as we've been handed curveballs for the past year. So, I'm feeling comfortable with that.
And I have one last question on these numbers now. Do they include the bus driver positions that we just added last week?
Yes, our transportation budget for next year is $505,000, and then that's included in the second interim report that figures that you saw there and that you'll see on March 11th.
Further questions, clarifications?
Again, it is my biggest hope that I will be doing a lot of work that's never needed.
And
So-
Andy, use a line. Remember, plan for the worst,
Yes.
hope for the best. That's what we're doing.
Yep, exactly.
So
you for that.
we're all very comfortable and happy with the mitigation plan, the timeline, and the decision-making tools that were presented. I think that it's a really all-encompassing way to move forward, and I thank the administration for all their work on this. Thank you. Does anyone else want to say anything? Any more comments or questions?
Well, I've got a quick one. and I apologize for this, is the April 10th, the property tax certification report, is that usually how can I ask, what is it? Is it, what percentage of that compared to the November? Is it like, 10% more income, or, can you describe kind of the amount of money the amount of funding that we get during that time?
Oh, the amount of property taxes that from a cash flow perspective, we get most of our property tax funding in November. And then in terms of what the increase, I've really seen it vary from year to year. So maybe one year, our property tax projections in April are $10,000 more than what the projections were in November. And then we get our final certification report in August for the previous year. Yeah, so it's always a projection of what your total amount of property taxes will be for the full year.
Okay, so it's a projection.
Yes, for the
It's a
full year.
projection and not cash coming in.
Correct, yeah.
Okay,
And the majority of the cash comes in November with another big infusion in the spring.
Okay, great.
I'm just looking at my notes here. I have one last question. Due to the fire, it looks like there might be a lot of new or reconstruction going on. Is there a different category for rebuilding buildings that are destroyed by fire, or were those construction projects count as a new construction, and will they have to pay my mind is
Developer
the
fee?
developer fees? Will the developer fees apply to new or home reconstruction after fire?
I believe only if they're expanding on the original footprint, so adding more square footage to beyond the original footprint of the property. I'll get some clarification on that.
So there is possible developer fees on the construction projects in the fire zone.
Possibly. I'll review and put some information out.
Anything else? Well, do I have a motion to adjourn tonight's study session?
I'll make a motion to adjourn tonight's study session.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Meeting adjourned at 6:28 p.m.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.